Scrolling on Substack actually makes me feel a little bit sick to my stomach. There's just so many posts on here with thousands and thousands of likes and so much written word, and it's just not very good. Every single post on here is basically just like, boys don't like me because I'm too complicated, or I have too many hobbies, I'm overwhelmed, or just I'm yearning for something, I wish my life was better. And I'm not saying that these aren't noble topics of conversation, but it's just the way that they're written. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when you go to a cafe with a friend and you haven't seen them in a long time, and it's so busy and so loud in there that there's this almost kind of intimacy where you feel free to talk about anything because you're sure that nobody's listening. I mean, maybe the table beside you is looking over at you like you're acting strange, but that almost spurs you on more. So you just talk about anything, you say something mean about a person that you used to know, or you just kind of say anything that comes to mind. You don't think, these aren't thoughts that have been put together over time that you've sat and thought out. They're just the first things that come to mind, kind of weightless and impermanent. And usually they're just a bit gossipy. They're a little bit maybe mean-spirited or, immature. But it doesn't matter because it's just a conversation between friends with the first thing that comes to mind. And so even though I think that there's a place for these kind of conversations that are just kind of complainy and ridiculous, it feels like writing them down and claiming that they're an essay, that just doesn't feel like correct because they're not art. They're just the first things that came to mind. If you don't know what Substack is, you're probably very confused. Substack is a self-publishing social media site, I would say. Recently, though, Substack has kind of become this landing place for internet users who are interested in the so-called anti-scrolling movement. So that is to say individuals who are looking for more complex and scholastic content to access online. But like all social media platforms, Substack has developed its own sort of culture. I find myself that the site and its users kind of tout it as this escape from the filth of social media, right? These large problems that we've all encountered on the internet, the endless scroll, the lowbrow content, the kind of wastefulness of it all. Substack seems to be kind of the cure to this, is what's promised. But there's something I find very insincere about arguing that in order to become healthy, to become a full creative human being, you need to kind of break away from the chains of social media and then having these conversations on a social media platform. I think that there has been some conversation about this insincerity as of late, maybe the past couple weeks. I haven't really been interested in the conversation that much because it kind of just diagnoses the problem and then argues that we should kind of reject Substack generally, which I don't think is correct. I wanted to kind of figure out my own thoughts and feelings on it, to think about it in maybe a more complex way. The significance of this issue with Substack to me is that I fancy myself a writer, so I've posted a couple times on Substack some things that I'm really proud of, and I tell people actively to go find my work on there. I think that there is a role for Substack as like a distributor, a printing press, in my kind of creative writing process as an independent writer. So I care about the state of the app, and I care about figuring out how to use it in a way that might be more, it might not make me as sick to my stomach, I guess. I've never gone on Substack and walked away thinking, wow, I feel so much better. I kind of always leave it feeling sluggish, confused, and bad about myself, which is contradicting with the kind of sentiment about it being a wellness app, right? Why does it make me feel so bad about myself? Was where I started this. The whole tone of Substack actually reminds me of that scene from the movie Good Will Hunting. I don't know if you've seen it. My boyfriend Noah, it's his favorite movie. He references it a lot, so it's kind of always in my mind. It's good. Basically, it's about this boy from Boston, and he's poor, and he gets mixed up in petty crime, but he's actually very, very smart. The famous scene from the film is that he's working as this janitor at MIT, and he's like mopping up the floor after hours, and he stumbles upon this chalkboard with like an unsolvable problem, and he solves the problem, and he gets caught by a bunch of professors and scouted because they basically see his potential as this like great thinker. But the scene that Substack kind of reminds me of, makes me feel like, is that moment when Will and his friends are in a college bar. Sorry, I'm just getting over a sickness. My voice is a bit weak today. So yes, there's this scene when Will and his friends are in this like college bar, and one of Will's friends tries hitting on a college woman, and then is humiliated by another guy who's in his first year of grad school at Harvard. The Harvard student rambles off a bunch of information disjointedly to kind of demonstrate how much smarter he is than Will's friend, but Will overhears this and sees through the nonsense, pointing out how the grad student is actually just regurgitating a bunch of talking points from famous authors. His speech sounds impressive, but is actually devoid of any personal reflections. He's basically just synthesizing existing information passively. Will calls him out, and he ends up impressing the girl, and whatever. There's a lot to be said about that scene, but I think it's very satisfying to watch. Anyways, thinking about that bar scene actually led me toward the argument that I want to make in this video. So I went into Google Scholar and I looked up the words Good Will Hunting bar scene, right? And it led me to chapter 2 of this book called Imagining the Academy, Higher Education and Popular Culture. The chapter was written by Joe Kiros. And it introduced me to a theory by the poet and writer Lewis Hyde. The author was looking at the bar scene through this lens of theory by Hyde. I found a copy to pirate, and it just had the foreword available, and it was actually written by Margaret Atwood. So that intrigued me even more because she's an author that I really respect. I've seen her speak quite a few times, and I've gotten the sense that before she was an author, she was just a very dedicated reader. I think her recommendation of this book made me immediately intrigued and also a little bit embarrassed that I'd never heard of it. So I ended up buying my own copy of it, and I'll read you the foreword that I read. So this is Margaret Atwood speaking. She says, "The gift has never been out of print. It moves like an underground current among artists of all kinds, through word of mouth and bestowal. It is the one book I recommend without fail to aspiring writers, painters, and musicians, for it is not a how-to book. There are many of these, but a book about the core nature of what it is that artists do, and also about the relation of these activities to our overwhelmingly commercial society. If you want to write, paint, sing, compose, act, or make films, read The Gift. It will help to keep you sane." And then she says, "One guarantee, you won't come out of the gift unaltered. This is a mark of its own status as a gift, for gifts transform the soul in ways that simple commodities cannot." I mean, Margaret Atwood's claim that this book is basically going to transform your soul is a big one. After reading it, I think I need to read it a couple more times to feel that kind of transformation, but maybe it did help me think through my place in this world as an artist, and it definitely helped me to think through this issue that I have with Substack generally. I read this entire book, and so I'm going to try to summarize it in relation to this conversation about Substack. There is a lot in this book. It's a lot more technical and economic than I actually expected, but I would recommend reading it. I think that there was some really interesting conversations in here, and even if you aren't, I feel like everyone's an artist, but even if you don't fancy yourself an artist in something specific, as someone who appreciates art or has a general care about the safety of art, this is a book that I think can be very helpful, but it is quite technical actually. But basically, the overarching question that this book asks is, how does the artist make true art under a capitalist economic system? And then also, what is the role of art in a system that favors commodity over gift? Hyde's argument begins with the distinction between this thing called the gift and this thing called the commodity. It's very complicated, but I'm going to try to explain it in a few ways. Basically, Hyde argues that art is a gift. Art can be a commodity because it can be sold, but to be art, it is always a gift. An object that only exists to make money is a commodity, and is not art, and is not a gift. A gift is offered freely. Its value comes from it being priceless, whereas a commodity is independent of social relations and personal obligations between the people who exchange it. It only moves through the market to turn a profit. A gift is passed on, it's set free. A gift that is set free continues to grow, but once a commodity is sold, nothing ensures its return. It's just used up. There is something created in the gift of art that always exists. A gift creates momentum as it moves from body to body. But a market exchange of commodities is about stasis. You pay and you balance that stasis. And finally, my favorite, and I think the most important distinction between the gift and the commodity begins with this quote from D.H. Lawrence. Hyde cites D.H. Lawrence, who says, not I, but the wind that blows through me." And Lawrence is talking about the part of the creation of art that comes from some non-human, mystic space of inspiration. Hyde says, "Genuine artists do not work for markets. They do not even create consciously. Any true artists have the uncanny sense that I, the artist, did not make the work." And all artists know this moment, when you just become this vessel for creation, how ideas kind of seem to come from somewhere else, like a wind that blows through you. Our desire to create is a moment of inspiration, caused by the sense that we have to create, and so the art is made. A gift does not exist to fulfill the market. It's made because it must be made, because the wind blew through you, but a commodity does. For instance, many people are getting burned out on the kind of fast-paced, short-form, cheap content market that's online. And this has led to a gap in the market for pseudo-intellectual think pieces, right? To make people feel better about themselves. We all have this general kind of brain fog from the endless scroll. We all kind of feel stupid and useless. And so people are realizing there's a lot of money to be made there. Many people are flocking to Substack and YouTube to make these long-form think pieces, not from an inspiration that has struck them, the need to think through these things, but the idea that they can gain some fame and turn a profit. So they're writing from this space of commodity, and so therefore their work is not real art. So whilst you're scrolling on Substack and you're being promised art, you're not interacting with any real art, or very few moments of real art. And of course, algorithms favor the kinds of things that are cheap, easy, quick, right? So most of what you're seeing on Substack is not real art. It's people who are looking to turn a profit. In the bar scene in Good Will Hunting, the Harvard-educated student presents a commodity approach to intellectual development. He's aligned with the academy, repeating commonly held sentiments without really thinking through them. He comes from this place of elegant dress, cash prizes, and salary in exchange for thoughtfulness and ideas. And Will, he just likes books and knowledge. He's gifted, and he uses this gift as an active process. He thinks through things. He creates. He has his own ideas about the world, right? These think pieces online, this so-called art on Substack, it's cheap. As someone who's read a lot of the books that people on there are quoting and arguing that you must read, I can tell you that there is very little art, very little thought, very little creation in there. Really, at the foundation of my critique of Substack is that it creates this kind of in-grouping and out-grouping. This is why I care so much. The people who suffer from this in-grouping and out-grouping are the real artists, or the real enjoyers of art. These articles about kind of becoming your highest intellectual self on Substack aren't made for you as a gift. They're made to turn a profit off of your insecurities about not being clever or highbrow enough. It's the Harvard student at the bar talking down to you. And if you haven't happened to read the exact things that they're talking about, you might not know how truly unoriginal and boring they sound. These think pieces, these kind of cheap essays, they're not art, they're not artistic, they're responses to market demands. As we culturally kind of shift away from short-form, brain-rotting content to something more solid and intellectual, the demand for this kind of content goes up. All of that being said, I do think that we need to keep this argument as complex as possible, because having a social media app that is full of original writing from artist to reader directly, that offers free content for the most part, to me isn't altogether good. I think it's great. I think it's brilliant that people are turning away from TikTok and moving towards something just a little bit more thoughtful. I think that's great. So to keep this argument complex, I want to go back to one of the facets of the gift that we talked about earlier. If you remember, Hyde says that a gift needs to be passed on. To pull Good Will Hunting back into this again, I don't know. Will finally realizes at the end of the movie, this is kind of his arc, his character arc. He finally realizes at the end of the movie that although he's skeptical of the academy and its commercialization of his gifts and other people's gifts, he realizes that he has to share his gift. Otherwise, it isn't really a gift at all, because a gift needs to be passed along, right? What good is a gift that isn't shared? It just sits there. It's not a gift. And honestly, gifting and creation of art as a gift continues to be one of the greatest things that humans are capable of. Obviously, we exist within a market economy, an economy that harms the art, the artist, and the art enjoyer. But within this kind of scary, scary world remains art. The commercialization of this art is the backdrop upon which this conversation takes place. We live in a time of intense destruction of the spirit of the gift. Although we've always had those strained relationships between gift exchange and the market, exploitation of art in the current era is absolutely unprecedented, Hyde says. And he's writing before AI. He's writing before the modern internet. I mean, he's not writing about Substack. He doesn't even know how far this kind of exploitation could eventually go. But the gift is given from generosity, and that's how it survives. It's not the same as mass production of meaningless, identical objects for the market. The goal, maybe, should not be just to quit Substack, but to continue on this generosity and continue giving. To give gifts and look for those who are giving them, to read and explore the things that they're writing. Unconsciously, I think my impulse has been to kind of do just that. I share my thoughts when the moment of inspiration comes in these short little essays, under the thought that maybe somebody is feeling the same way as me and will find some comfort in what I'm giving them. I haven't tried to grow on Substack. If you want to, you can subscribe to me, but all I'll share on there is gifts. I'm not going to try to sell anything. I'm not going to try to make you feel bad about what you haven't read yet. And if you're an artist, I should say, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you aren't a true artist or a true creative just because these people online are telling you that you aren't. And then telling you to subscribe to their newsletter so that they can teach you to be better. The market is never going to be this perfectly clean, holy place that the art comes from. The spirit comes from something much more shameful, imperfect, strange, unknowable. It's this strange wind that blows, like Lawrence says, within all of us. Hyde quotes Allen Ginsberg, who says that good art creation comes from abandoning the idea of being a prophet with honor and dignity, and just settling down in the muck of your own mind. And I think that's where we need to be writing from. Generosity from the muck. Anyways, those are all my thoughts. I'd be really interested in hearing what you guys have to say about this subject. You're always so brilliantly thoughtful, and I love you guys very much. Bye!